So real quick, I want to talk about that Ontario book burning that happened. So it was a francophone school in Southwest Ontario. Um, what they did was they took over 4,000 books from the library shelves at these 30 or so schools, and they did a ritualistic burning of them. They brought them all together, torched these books, or otherwise disposed of them, and then buried the ashes to plant a tree. Um, I'm reading the National Post here as I go through this. It's from Tyler Dawson. He made a very good piece on this. More than 47,000 books were removed from the library shelves at 30 schools, and they've since been destroyed or in the process of being recycled. Um, this book burning, like I said, at Ontario Francophone School Board. Um, what's interesting about this is the only people who have failed to condemn this in some way are the Liberals. The NDP have thankfully taken the same position as us that book burnings are bad. Um, I have to give respect to Mr. Singh on that. Um, O'Toole has been a bit mealy mouthed, saying, "Oh well, we destroying books isn't good," but I found Trudeau's response absolutely appalling. Rather than sitting there saying book burning is unacceptable, or no matter what, his response was that he does not agree with it, as if to imply there's ever a world where book burning is acceptable, where the destruction of knowledge is acceptable. And some of these books that were destroyed, they were comics for like teenagers, children. Asterisk and Obelisk. Um, it's a comic set in the Roman Empire about Germanic tribes having humorous battles against the Romans. And there was one issue where they went, I guess, to the New World and and met natives. They also burned Tintin. These old comics from different eras that honestly aren't even that offensive, but they had to be destroyed for some reason. They had to be burned. Um, yeah, I want to talk about the response to this from the national leaders. So, the what the school board said after the backlash is, well, this is the first thing they said. School library, she said, this is. Lynn Cossette is the board's spokesperson. So what she says on this is, quote, symbolically, some books were used as fertilizer. Sorry, I should start earlier. Quote, many Aboriginal knowledge keepers and elders, whatever that means, I don't know, participated and were consulted at various stages, from the conceptualization to the evaluation of the books to the tree planting initiative. End quote. Start a quote again. Symbolically, some books were used as fertilizer. And she writes this in an email. The project was entitled Redonnons à la Terre, Give Back to the Earth. In English, that's what it means. And it was intended to, quote, make a gesture of openness and reconciliation by replacing books in our libraries that had outdated content and carried negative stereotypes about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. I don't know what's so negative about a French boy asking an Aboriginal man for a photo, as was the case in the Tintin comic that was burned. I don't know what's offensive about that. Maybe there's something lost in translation there from French to English. I don't speak French very well, so maybe I'm missing something there. But I don't see that as being potentially offensive in any way, shape, or form. But to continue on, she speaks about the school library, saying that the library books on the shelves will have positive and inclusive messages about the diverse communities within our schools. This is what they're going to replace it with. And, quote, we regret that we did not intervene to ensure a more appropriate plan for the commemorative ceremony that it was offensive to some members of the community. We sincerely regret the negative impact of this initiative intended as a gesture of reconciliation. When the leaders of the country, the various party leaders, were questioned about this, Trudeau gave the following response, quote, to tell Indigenous people how they should feel or act to advance, asked about the book burning, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau said it's not up to non-Indigenous people to, quote, tell Indigenous people how they should feel or act to advance reconciliation. On a personal level, I would never agree to the burning of books, end quote, Trudeau said. That is a very weak response, even compared to the other leaders. O'Toole gave I'd say a middle of the road response. Quote, the Conservative government is committed to reconciliation, but the road to reconciliation does not involve tearing Canada down. I strongly condemn book burning. Now, I agree with O'Toole on this. I also agree with Yves-François Blanchet, leader of the Bloc Québécois, when he said, quote, we don't burn books, at a press conference when asked about it. He continued, quote, we expose ourselves to history, we explain it, we demonstrate how society has evolved or must evolve, end quote. And that's a very, very intelligent way of responding to this. I have to agree with that entirely. We have something to learn from these books. Even if we assume that they are offensive and they are no longer representative of what can be accepted, we can still learn from them. We can learn the ways that we've changed, how we've grown. By destroying them, we lose that knowledge, that potential knowledge of knowing how far we have come since then. Singh, the NDP leader, this is quoting National Post again, said the news calls for reflection. His quote here is, I have seen negative images, cartoons, and presentation that do not respect the dignity of Indigenous communities, so I think we really need to change our approach to teaching our children. That's what he says. Now, that's a very weak response as well. However, that is still better than Trudeau, who said, well, I don't agree with it. He's at least coming out with a position. Continuing on here. Among them were the classic titles like Tintin, Tintin in America, and that was withdrawn for its, quote, negative portrayal of Indigenous peoples and offending Aboriginal representation in their drawings. They also removed a bunch of books that allegedly contain cultural appropriation, as well as outdated history books, such as two biographies of Jacques Cartier, one of the French explorers who mapped the St. Lawrence, and another explorer, Etienne Brulé. Now, first I want to say, sorry if I mispronounce any of the names. I am not very good at French. But destroying out-of-date or incorrect cartographic information, that doesn't benefit anybody. These maps tell us something about the previous world, if only because it shows how the previous explorers were wrong compared to what we have now. And they committed no sins by being wrong with what they created, with what they took down. That's not something that we should be condemning them for. It's ridiculous. Now, for me, I can only say that book burning in any and all forms is unacceptable. All book burnings are evil. All of them. There is no such thing as a good book burning. There's no such thing as a book that should be burned. All knowledge must be retained, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences. All of it. Because without knowledge, we lose sight of what is important. Knowledge brings us wisdom. Wisdom is gained from the experience of our ancestors, and our ancestors wrote down their wisdom for us to be gleaned from through books. And these very same books are at times the ones that these zealots, these race politicking zealots, cultists, honestly, these are the things that they want to destroy, because that knowledge of the past, that wisdom of the pre-revolution, that is what builds a Canadian identity outside of their cult. They cannot allow that to happen. They cannot allow for a Canadian identity to exist besides or outside of their cult. They must control everything. And that is why they want to burn all of our books. That's all I got for you today. Hopefully these book burnings don't continue. Hopefully they will stop sooner rather than later, but I don't have a whole lot of hope for the future. I can only see it continuing on in ever greater intensity, and one day, hopefully soon, we'll see these book burnings end and the people who perpetrate them facing the consequences of their actions. Talk to you again soon.